George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, talking about police community relations and a program in Newark, New Jersey that seeks to bridge the divide or the perceived divide between the community and the police. The program is called Trauma to Trust, and Lionel Latouche is the senior program manager for Trauma to Trust. What do they do? Well, they train police officers and they train community members side by side so that each one can understand each other. The statistics, they say, has helped Newark to avoid some of what has happened in other cities across this country. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't any crime in Newark. It just means that the police involved, there were no police involved shootings in the year 2020. If I have that correct, Lionel?
That is correct. You got that right on the head.
So, Lionel, tell me about, first of all, welcome to Inspiration for the Nation. And this program came about a couple of years ago under a different name and format. But how did this program begin?
Well, the program started about, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, and 2016 or 2015. And individuals were approached about possibly having a healing-based program that used trauma, right, as a vehicle towards healing for the community. And in the opening steps of that conversation, community members and community leaders were tapped, and there was listening sessions to understand what were the things that were going on in Newark that were plaguing the community, what was impacting the community negatively, what were the perceptions of police and community interactions, what was the trauma that existed. And from that, they were able to just gather information, right, and just extrapolate information about the experience of Black and brown people in the city of Newark. From there, and there's history in Newark regarding just historical trauma, the Newark Riots of 1967. I think a lot of people know about that, and just a history of poor police and community interactions. So with that information that was gathered, they began to highlight some of the key points, some of those pinpoints of what would lead to healing in the city. At that point, they also were able to highlight and identify key stakeholders in the police department that could get behind the need for healing and transformation and change in interactions between police and community. From there, they began to kind of create this experiential workshop of what it would be like to bring police and community in the room, and they did some editing and trial and error, and just figuring out what would be the best thing to bring, the best way of having this conversation, with the goal of shifting perspectives. And really, the tenet of Trauma to Trust is for perspectives to shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
What happened to you?
And yes, correct.
Yeah, what happened? Right. We talk about that because so much of trauma is not seen, right? And people act out in the response to the trauma that we don't see, right? So there's that what happened to you piece of that. And I'm listening to you thinking about similar things that happen in this community with an organization called Interfaith Works, where I sat through a several-week session with police officers prior to George Floyd, right? So this is, and just like yours, prior to, I guess from this point on, everything is going to be related to the George Floyd incident and how communities are responding before and after. And I remember sitting in some of those sessions with police officers, and you're right, it does in some way, it does change your perspective somewhat if the officers are open to it, right? Right. And I think I'm interested because one of the things I'm thinking about is I know that I haven't had any much follow-up with the officers who were in our sessions. And again, this was a couple of years ago. So I was very interested in this, maybe this approach seems like it's a lot more trauma informed, right? Yes, because I think that was more of a dialogue, understanding each other. But your program really seeks to look at what officers are experiencing and the trauma that they're going through as well, as I understand it.
Well, let's take another example to kind of create a parallel, right? So, um, being a black man and walking into a space, one of
Right.
the first things that I look for is there another brother in this room?
Word.
Is there a sister in this room?
What's up? You better you ready to give the head nod, right?
Exactly. What's up? How you doing?
Right.
And there is something that happens because I don't need to know that brother or sister, but by me being able to see someone, right, that looks like me or is similar to me, there's a part of me that feels connected. And knowing that we might have similar experiences, whether that is going to be in this space
Mm-hmm.
or possibly outside of the space, that builds a common bridge, right? We
Sure.
recognize each other, we see each other. Now, that's what this trauma, using as an example, that's the vehicle of trauma. Trauma is just the vehicle, right? The discussion point, the vehicle by which we get to a place of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are able to see, just like the brother in me is able to see the brother in someone else or the sister in someone else, if we are able to see the trauma in someone else, we now tap into a different place of that person's existence. Now, you said
Mm-hmm.
something beautifully. You said that trauma is often not seen. We often think when we hear trauma, we think medical trauma, right?
Yeah. Right.
Physiological trauma,
Right. Right.
a gunshot wound or an injury or some sort of something that's wounding of someone's person from a physiological standpoint. But trauma, really, I think the more impactful trauma is that psychological, mental, and emotional trauma that people carry.
Right.
And but you can't see that on someone's sleeve. It's not like
Right.
being black. I
Right.
see your
Right.
skin, you know I'm black, you know I know you're
Right.
black.
Right.
But I can't see the trauma from someone else.
Right.
So that requires us going more than skin deep and going a little bit deeper and finding out what has someone's experience been. Now,
Mm-hmm.
chances are most of the population has incurred some form of trauma, whether it is cultural, familial, relational, you've gone through something, a natural disaster, you've incurred some sort of harm in your life. Most of us have experienced some level of trauma. Now, the beauty of trauma to trust is knowing that Black and Brown communities have been marginalized, disenfranchised, and oppressed. We've experienced high levels of trauma.
Yes.
Now, the police officer, law enforcement, the job of an officer is I am going to willingly expose myself to the worst ills of society and take on the trauma of other people
Every
because
day.
I believe that I'm helping, right?
Right. Right.
That's what at least officers in that position, that's what they believe. So there's a trauma that they're exposing themselves to.
Right.
And
That's
if
what
we're
at least that's how it's supposed to work. I'm taking a line from
mm,
Black Jeopardy when Keenan was asking T'Challa about the, calling the police and having the community be assisted. He said, well, that's how it's supposed to work, right? That's our hope, right? That's what our hope is.
right. And I think that is the on an individual basis.
Right.
I think that is the experience of or the belief and the perception of many officers. Like, I see this harm, I take on this harm every day. I
Mm-hmm.
expose myself. I'm worried about if I'm gonna get home, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we can agree that Black people feel the same exact way when they encounter the police. Maybe it's not
Right.
even the police. Maybe it's living in their communities, wherever they
Right.
come from. Will I make it home? Now, there's a bridge. There's a connector here.
Oh,
You're
I see that.
concerned about your safety. You're concerned about your well-being. I'm concerned about my safety. I'm concerned about my well-being. If I can see the humanity in you outside of the badge,
Mm-hmm.
outside of the blue uniform, if you can see the humanity in me outside of my skin color, outside of what you have possibly been told I am supposed to be, and you can see me for who I really am, now that vehicle of trauma begins to build a bridge of empathy towards the common man. And now we can see each other stripped down and see each other for who we really are, and not what we believe that person is supposed to be. Are we on the same page here?
I see you. I see you. But I also want to add this
Mm-hmm.
for communities like Syracuse, New York, most of the offices, and I don't know what the situation is there in Newark, New Jersey, but most of the communities, you also have the barrier of race as whereas most of the force is not Black and brown. I don't know what the situation is in Newark. You can help me out there. And so that to me adds another layer. And then most of the officers don't live with the residents that they serve. I'm sure that may be similar to Newark as well.
Mhm.
So when you introduce the issue of race and familiarity or going deeper, how do you see that playing a role? Because I feel that it shouldn't be a barrier, but it often is.
So I think you hit on a really good point here, and Newark is unique in the sense that a lot of the officers that are walking the streets of Newark are from Newark,
Yeah,
right? And I believe for a while you have had to have lived in Newark for a number of years to be an officer in the city of Newark. And a
y'all had
lot
like a
of those,
residency requirement or something like that.
yeah, I'm unsure if that is still in place, but I know that that was in place for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And but a lot of the officers are from the city, right? And a lot of these officers are Black and brown, right?
Right, right.
So there is that component of it that also plays in, right? If you know Charlie and Sarah and Lisa and them, right?
And
You
them.
if you going, and I say in them on purpose,
I know
right?
that. Right,
You gonna treat them differently because they're from your neighborhood,
right,
because they are a reflection of who you are, right?
right,
Now,
right.
that's an imperfect system,
Mm-hmm.
because what we're not talking about, and this is where I was going to go to, I talked about officers as as an individual and
Right,
helping people see everyone individually, but collectively as an institution there are still things that get passed down because the institution may have policies, may have practices, may have things that are ingrained into its fabric that by nature disenfranchise, target, and oppress people of color.
right. It's part
And
of
there's an
systemic. It's systemic. It's
there you go.
right. It's a systemic issue. Uh it's the system was built that way.
Mm,
And that's why you see a lot of conversations around dismantling the system. But then
mm.
how do you do that and also get justice in the communities? Because this idea, so all right, go ahead. Let me let you go because now you got my mind going here.
Well,
Go ahead.
you've opened up a beautiful point, right? And one of the things that we also point out, right, that the system that has been created, the institution of policing and the system at large in our society has marginalized and oppressed Black and brown people for centuries, right?
Right. And we need
And
to acknowledge that and just claim, you know what I mean? Because I think part of that, Lionel, as you speak to that, I know I keep jumping in, my apologies.
you're good, you're
But
good, you're good.
but if we would just acknowledge that, it's not to say that we got to live in that space, but what I feel happens is when you say that, the immediate response, at least in our community, is for people to become defensive. Well, our system isn't like that. And what do you mean? And I'm not that. And so that to me is one of the systemic problems, that we don't acknowledge that this has been the case. Yes, you coming into the force and you got great ideals and you want to care and you want to support and you want to protect and you want to serve, got you. But you have to, there's a failure to acknowledge that the very system that you're buying into has had that history. It's like 12 step. Unless we acknowledge it, we can't move it forward. Okay, Lionel, go ahead. Sorry, bro. You just got me going here, bro.
Hey, I'm right there with you, and I understand. And I think part of that is helping folks to acknowledge the harm, right?
Right.
And helping the system and those that are inside come to a place where the elevation of the personhood of not only the individual who's been harmed, but the collective that has been harmed becomes more important than withholding the morals, principles, policies, and practices of those that are doing the harming.
Yes.
So like, and that is where also one of the things that we do in the training is say, policing has not only harmed Black and brown communities, policing also has harmed police officers as well.
Mm.
Because one of the things that officers, when you really get them into the space and they begin to break the wall down, we have that blue wall of silence, right? And officers know exactly what that is.
Right.
You know, they got to maintain a sense of unity and a sense of protecting the shield. But when you allow for them to show their human side, they talk about how they are overworked. They talked about how they are overtrained. How they talk about how so much of their time so much of their training is spent on on how to use their weapon or how to subdue, but not enough time is spent on community policing or how to
Sure.
talk with people. And when you are trained in that sense, and when you spend so many hours of overtime, when you have shift after shift after shift, when you one call is someone being shot, another call is an issue regarding a child, another call is a domestic dispute, and all this is being layered upon you, and you're not given the time to breathe. No one is asking you, how are you feeling? Do you need a break? You can't take vacation. As you go through all that, you are left at disadvantage and you are left harmed as a result. And you become a cog in a wheel that is oppressive because you are being oppressed yourself.
One of the reasons why people don't ask how you're feeling if you're in the office is because you're not supposed to have any, right? You're supposed to wear the badge and wear the mask. And there's no space for you to show anything else if you're going to do your job. At least that's what they're told. I'm sure that's, that's part of it. So what you're saying to me then is Trauma to Trust is a space that allows for that vulnerability, that they don't have to go out in the community and show, because if they do that, they risk their lives. So that's how I'm interpreting what you're saying.
But not even do they risk their lives, they risk their livelihood. How many officers say, and I've heard this so many times, if I tell my boss, if I tell my commanding officer, I'm having a difficult time, the first thing that happens is they take my gun and they take my badge and I can't work no more and I can't feed my family.
Right.
So imagine if that threat of survival is looming over your head as an officer.
Right.
Right. So now think of that bridge now that's being built. The bridge and that understanding of not only am I oppressing other people, but the system that I'm working for is also oppressing me. That changes perspectives, right? And also it allows for one of the things that we've noticed in the space as well. And I'll say this for myself. I am a person who prioritizes the humanity and the authenticity of someone else's experience. And I want to show empathy and concern and care and consideration for that. And I think Black people are like that, period, full stop.
Right.
And when that shows up in the space, whether it's a white officer, whether it's a Black officer, a Latino or Latina officer, there is a sense of empathy that just pours out of Black people, because we say, how are y'all gonna let a system oppress y'all in that way? We need to be advocating for the officers that are serving in our community, that are doing a good job, that are being overworked, overrun, and unseen. And a lot of times that allows for officers to begin to hear and connect and begin to acknowledge the harm that people of color are experiencing at the hands of the institution of policing.
How many officers have gone through the Trauma to Trust as well as community?
So currently, I'm going to give you two numbers, right? So as of December 2019, and I'm saying 2019 because we know in 2020 the world came to a stop.
Right.
For some of us, not all of us, but for some of us.
Right.
There were 224 officers that went through our full-length 16-hour Trauma to Trust training. Right. That is almost 1/4 of Newark's police force. Go ahead.
And the chief paid for them to go through it.
Well, I will say that they partnered specifically with EJUSA and recognized the value of our officers need to go through this training, right? It became there was an agreement between the police department, the city, and EJUSA that all officers in Newark PD would go through Trauma to Trust. And that all incoming officers would also go through Trauma to Trust as a prerequisite.
So that was put into the academy, is what you're saying?
It was put into part of the healing initiative as making being a trauma-informed city, right? Listen, that came from the mayor's office, that came from the public safety office, where the police department comes from, and that came from the community that were asking for our officers to go through that training. And I will tell you, as of 2021, we've done a lot of shifting and recreating. We had to go to a virtual model where, as of this past June that just finished, we had, I think, an additional 50 officers go through the training, as well as another 50 community members go through the training in a more abbreviated virtual form. And we just recently in June had our first in-person training as well. So, and that was explicitly asked for by the public safety director, Brian O'Hara. So, and that is for the department is saying we need this to be a foundation in our community in order for us to police.
Now, did crime go down? That's what people want to know.
So go ahead.
Did it reduce crime? Because that's part of what you hope this would do, because you're increasing mutual understanding. Did it reduce crime? Or what types of crime did it reduce? Maybe that's the question.
So let's talk through that, right? And I think you're asking a great question. There was an article that came out, and you said it already, that in 2020, not one shot was fired by police officers, right? By Newark police officers. We also saw a major reduction in crime across the board in 2020. But I want to say this: it's not just because of the police department. Part of Trauma to Trust's modality in our thought and our ideology is that public safety isn't just in the hands of police.
Right.
Public safety is also in the hands of community. And there are organizations in the community that have rallied around and really elevated the holistic health and wellness of Newark as a whole. And that have become alternatives to policing, have become alternatives to police getting involved in mental health, to social services, and elevate the health and wellness of the community on all fronts so that the police don't have to get involved.
So our chief of police said that in our community, that's one of the pieces that he feels is missing, that these, you don't want the police, and you want a different response, but how are people showing up in that response? And you're suggesting to me that part of the partnership that Equal Justice USA and the Trauma to Trust program that you implemented, part of that partnership means that those other stakeholders must also be fully invested. So give me an example of how that works. So if you're saying alternatives to policing, walk me through how exactly that works.
So let me first say this: Newark is one of the few cities in the country where they have taken a portion of their budget and allocated it towards alternatives to policing. Right
within the police budget.
Within the police budget, they took. I want to get that number correct. I don't know if it's 5 or 9%, but they took a percentage of that police budget, and they allocated that money strictly for alternatives to policing. And they opened the Office of Violence Prevention, right? And that finds community-based, holistic means to preventing violence in the community.
Oh, so there's an Office of Violence Prevention within the Newark Police Department, and that's where those initiatives include some of the mental health and some of the other things that you're talking about?
Some of which, correct, right? That the Office of Violence Prevention in and of itself is creating different entities and different pieces in that program that touch different points of violence prevention within the community. But I also have to add in there were community programs and organizations that existed well before the creation of the Office of Violence Prevention. Organizations like the Newark Community Street Team, organizations like the Newark Street Academy, organizations like the Shani Baraka Center, right? The organizations like the Hub out in Newark. All these organizations that have had a wellness and healing approach towards violence and getting involved. That means the police don't have to be the end all be all. Specifically, I'm going to call out highlight the Newark Community Street Team. This is a organization that when there are threats of violence or events of violence that happen in the community, this organization actively goes out to interface and work and interact with those that have either committed the harm or have been harmed to do two things. A, get them access to resources for them to get on the path of healing, and B, to get involved and decrease the likelihood of retaliation should retaliation be on the table for further violence. And that in itself, we have the police department that partners right directly with NCST. We are part of the EJUSA is part of the South Ward Public Safety Roundtable, and this is a gathering of all of the community organizations and those entities and individuals that feel charged to the health and wellness of the organization, that sit in a roundtable together and discuss the health and wellness of the South Ward. And Captain Peppers, the commanding officer of that precinct, sits and talks about, gives us numbers, gives us statistics, talks about things that are happening, the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of what's happening in the community. Community organizations talk about the services that they can offer as an alternative to violence, whether that is regarding issues of domestic disputes or domestic issues, child and family issues, mental health issues, community and recreational supports. All those things come during this forum twice a month, where we get the chance to talk about the health and wellness of the community, right?
So, yeah, and we have similar organizations that do some variation of what you're talking about: Street Addiction Institute, OGs Against Gun Violence. And I'm not certain about the partnership necessarily directly with the city, but the city is aware. We have a trauma response team, clergy, faith communities. We talked about one of those last week on our program. Finally, Lionel Latouche, program manager for Equal Justice USA and the Trauma to Trust program. Is this something that you are looking to involve other cities with, and invite them to see what you're doing?
Great question. Currently, as I'm speaking to you, other cities are currently getting ready for the rollout of Trauma to Trust. They are in either deep in or the beginning of the workings to have Trauma to Trust be a part of the fabric of their cities. But we recognize that, as we engage other cities, we're not coming in there and saying we're going to lead the ship. We're coming in there and saying, who are the stakeholders that are already on the ground that we can empower, that we can inform, that we can partner with, as well as bringing the police involved. So that way, when Equal Justice Time finishes with that city, right? The work of Trauma to Trust continues, even if Trauma to Trust necessarily isn't being done in that same capacity. Mm-hmm. And there are definitely cities. We have some southern cities that are on the map right now. We have some western cities that are possibilities. We even have another northeast city. I can't name them right now because we can't name them necessarily just yet. But as the information comes out, we'll definitely begin to share that. And there are folks that are interested. We want for people to know more about Trauma to Trust.
Because you're opening up training opportunities for the fall, and some of that could be virtual as well. All right. Well, Lionel, tell people how to get a hold of Equal Justice USA and the Trauma to Trust program, building healing relationships between community and police, understanding the trauma from both community and from police.
Our first thing is go to our website. You can go to equaljustice.usa.org. You can find out more about Equal Justice, who we are, and you can find out more about Trauma to Trust and what Trauma to Trust has done and the work that is being done in the community and the trailblazing that we'll be doing and looking nationally. If you want more info on Trauma to Trust, you can actually reach out to me directly. The best way to reach me directly is through email. You can go to Lionel L, so LIONEL at EJUSA.org. We also have a bunch of different periodicals or articles and media pieces done on Trauma to Trust as well. A quick Google search will show you videos by the GRIO, show you articles that have been run in different publications. Feel free to check that out as well.
And they just heard directly from you. So there you go. And what else did you want to say?
No, I would say that would be the best way. You can follow us on Facebook as well, Equal Justice USA. We also have an Equal Justice USA Newark-based healing page as well. Feel free to follow us there.
Lionel Latouche, he is the program manager for Equal Justice USA, speaking today about the Trauma to Trust program, Healing Community. Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you. Pleasure for having me.
Inspiration for the Nation.